And this one hits home, where much of the funding that our politicians are sending to Ukraine is funding their government operations. Yes, a lot of it is going towards different weapon systems for certain, but we are funding their bureaucrats to run their government.
Thanks for swinging in and being willing to do this. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having us. This is our first time to your beautiful state.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Andy, he's invited. Well, first of all, this is the first time I've met him in person, but we have like 100 mutual friends. And so he's, for the last couple of years, he's like, hey, you should come out and come snowboarding and stay at our place, this and that. And we've just never been able to make the time.
Yeah.
And so this all worked out really well.
That's awesome.
And so we're hitting multiple things on this trip. We're making the most of the 4 days we have here.
Which is hard to do in Montana because it's a pretty big state.
Exactly.
People are always like, oh, we're in Montana. We want to stop by and see you. And I'm like, where you at? And they're like, oh, we're over in Billings. It's like, well, you're 5 hours from here. So
you leave early in the morning.
Yeah. Andy's awesome. You did his podcast this morning,
His podcast this morning. Went to his BRCC.
Yep.
There in Kalispell, we had a lot of people who came out, a lot of them who saw it on Instagram or whatever, and they came out. A lot of people were just coming through the coffee shop, and they're like, oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
There's her book. There she is.
That's
It
awesome.
was really cool.
Isn't that a beautiful coffee shop?
It's
It's
amazing.
about as nice as you can get.
Yeah. It's
awesome.
For
people that don't know, we're talking about Andy Stumpf and the Black Rifle Coffee store up in Kalispell. So for people that are like coming to Glacier Park, that's like 30 minutes from the entrance to Glacier right there.
Worth the trip.
For sure.
And then we went and did this event in Whitefish with an event. It is the Independent Women's Forum, but really it's a conglomeration of about 12 different nonpartisan organizations or bipartisan organizations that are coming together around the protection of women and girls in sports and fairness and equality, and dealing with the issue of Title IX being destroyed.
Yeah, it's just bonkers to me, that whole entire argument about, I mean, the whole point of Title IX. I think we were kids when Title IX.
It's been like 52, 53 years since it was enacted into law.
Oh, so it's even been longer than that.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to me that we have to actually argue about the fact that these biological males can't compete against our young girls. I mean, I have 3 daughters, and they're all athletic. I mean, my second daughter that you'll meet later tonight, I mean, she's going to college on a basketball scholarship. And we talk about it all the time. Her younger brother is 15 years old. She's a college athlete.
Right. But
even a few years ago, if she was to play him in basketball, he would destroy her.
Right.
And she's a college level athlete, basketball player. It's just crazy to me that we have to have that discussion. I mean, or that you even had to go and do that. But I'm glad that there's people like that are standing up and saying something, because I think that a lot of people feels like a lot of people for the first few years of this going on were scared to even say anything. You see,
people are still scared, unfortunately, and gradually momentum is building. There are a few female athletes that really stepped out into the forefront and caught a lot of crap for it. Had sponsors cancel on them and so forth, but their willingness to do that has empowered other women and girls and coaches of girls sports teams to come forward. And so, my hope is, and it seems to be coming about, that more and more people are like, okay, I know I'm not alone in thinking that this is absolutely insane.
Right.
And that's really the key here is President Biden, through the stroke of a pen, backdoored this change to Title IX that essentially destroyed it.
Yeah.
Completely destroyed the definition, redefined Title IX so that it would allow any boy or man who says, well, I now identify as a woman or a girl, to now take that opportunity and position away from a biological female.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he backdoored it by passing Congress, completely undermining our system of governance and how do you amend a law? Well, you have to go through Congress in order to do that. So there's legislation now, and this was kind of the call to action in the rally today, and one they're doing a road trip all across the country. It's called the Congressional Review Act, and basically it is Congress doing its job in challenging the administration to say, hey, you did not follow the process, and therefore this rule change is unconstitutional and should not be implemented.
Right.
So, that for people who feel hopeless and feel like there's nothing that we can do, no, there are things that we can do.
Sure.
And this specific instance is that call to action.
I tend to be a pretty small government guy, keep government out of a lot of things. But the one thing I'll say is I wish, I saw this, and I won't give too much detail because I wouldn't want this person to get back to this person and make this poor young girl feel bad. But there was a girl on one of my daughter's teams years ago that I think had started the transitioning process at some point, probably early high school, late junior high, and then stopped it. But she was forever changed. I mean, her facial features, her whole body, you could tell that she had done, some of the hormone stuff and the estrogen blockers and all that stuff. That's where I feel like government should get involved and say, hey, until you're 18 years old, you cannot be stopping, puberty.
Right.
You can't tell me, I mean, if we're not going to allow kids to buy cigarettes, you could argue it's the same kind of thing. You're damaging your body, and you should at least be of a certain age to make that decision more wisely as an adult.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that just is one of the many inconsistencies and hypocrisies that is so obvious in all of this, is that, kids have to get parents' permission for a very, very simple, prescription medication or whatever. I mean, a very, very simple, they can't go and get oral surgery at a dentist without getting their parents' approval.
Right.
And yet they make the exception when it comes to this irreversible, in many cases, whether it be the hormone blockers or if they actually go all the way and get these surgeries done, that will forever change them.
Even parents' permission in this situation, like that,
I agree with you.
It shouldn't even be, because a lot of times I feel like the parents are pushing this weird narrative on their kids when they're actually just being kids. I mean, if they're playing, a little boy's playing with some dolls or, playing dress up with his sisters, and there's parents going, hey, I think he really wants to be a girl. And like, they're literally molding their kids towards that way of thinking. And at least give them a chance to grow up, turn 18.
And make the decision for themselves.
Yeah, and then at that point, if people want to do what they want to do, fine. But also, you shouldn't be allowed to swim against my daughter.
Right. I agree.
So, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I did want to jump back to your book. I find it's been fascinating. I've been listening to it. I'm terrible about reading books, but I was driving back from Hat Creek training, doing some shooting over in Idaho, and I was listening to your book, and I told you downstairs it struck me when you started singing, which was really, really cool to hear. And I didn't know it was Abraham, your husband, sitting over here to the left. Your book is just what I love about it is it feels like you're the perfect messenger to talk about what's happening in government, about like the pressures that are put on people once you get to Congress.
Yeah.
I've said this before. John Tester, who's from Montana, he was my godfather growing up.
Wow.
He was just a wheat farmer, school teacher. He cut our meat every year. And I really, truly believe when he went into Congress, he was what he, as advertised. I knew he was. He was a really good person. Yeah. What made him a Democrat or a Republican at that moment, I don't really know. But I just know he was a good person. And I feel like, and he even used to stop at my folks' place each year. He'd come back, and when he was driving through, he would stop and say hi to my folks. And then you saw less and less of him, and now you don't ever see him. And I feel like Washington just ate him alive. And very few people have had the backbone to actually stand up to their own party, right or left, and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to toe the company party line. And, to me, it's the definition of why we need term limits, because I feel like a person like John, who's now running against Tim Sheehy, John has to go. He's been swallowed up by, I feel like, making these little small decisions here and there of, give a little here because I'm going to get this for Montana. Well, I'm going to go with this bill because they're telling me I'm not going to get funding for Montana here. And you think you're making those decisions for the right reason, but you're chipping away at your morals and your values and your ethics. And listening to you talk about your experience in Washington and those pressures, it's mind-boggling, but I feel like people need to listen to your book and listen to what you have to say about it. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad that that's what came through. There's so much that people don't realize or know about why things are so broken and dysfunctional in Washington, and why it is that someone who goes there with the best of intentions, if they're not careful, can easily get sucked into that Washington bubble where instead of spending your day and your time thinking about your constituents who sent you there or the American people and making your decisions within that context, it can very quickly turn into a fear and concern factor of like, well, if I say this, then my party's going to be mad at me, or this special interest is not going to donate to my campaign anymore, or I'm not going to get invited to, the cool kids party or the cool kids table. It was one of the things that struck me very quickly when I got there was how cliquish it is and how much like high school it is, and how you've got, all of these different groups, and it's both made up of members of Congress, and then there's the fancy lobbyists that everyone wants to be close to.
Well, and it would be easy to tell yourself that you are doing it for Hawaii.
Oh, for sure.
Like,
how can I best position myself to be in a place where I can be effective and impactful? I see it.
Yeah.
But along the way,
but where do you draw the line? Like,
exactly.
The line continues to get blurred so far to where where's the line ever get drawn?
And I've seen, and it's sad to say, but I've seen it with people who I used to be friends with, how along that journey they forget who they are. Yeah. And they forget why they're there and who they're there to serve.
Well, and you were in a position, unlike most people that go out there, you really truly were, I remember very vividly, you were in a position to be, frankly, the star of the party. I mean, you were on that track. You checked a lot of boxes that
not by design. It surprised me when I showed up, and there was like, people were like, oh, you must have the best publicist in the world. Like, I've never had a publicist. What are you talking about? Yeah. Well, how are you getting on this show and in that magazine and in this place and in this opportunity? And it was quite surprising to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I don't have any doubt that if I had just been like, all right, let's go on this ride and see where it leads, it would very likely have led to a very different place than me sitting across the table from you here in Montana.
You might be running for president right now on the left as a Democratic candidate. I mean, honestly, that was the track you were headed on, or could have been.
Yeah. But that's where, things started to shift, and then eventually shifted completely in the opposite direction. Was once the leaders of the Democrat Party quickly, within a few months, realized like, oh, okay, she's not just gonna toe the party line, and it first broke when I came out publicly and disagreed with a policy that President Obama put forward. And the backlash was immediately there, saying, how dare you do this? How dare you go against your president? Which is part of the whole problem. And I've seen it in both parties where you can have two different presidents at different times make a very similar decision or a very similar action. And in both situations, you'll have, Democrats refuse to criticize their own president when they do it, but will tear apart the Republican president for doing it, and vice versa. The same is true. Yep. And it just, you wonder why voters are so disenfranchised, and looking at what's going on in Washington and just seeing like, man, you guys are all full of crap.
Yeah.
You're full of crap.
No, it's 100% true. And we've seen, even like the border issue. I remember years and years ago, it was the left that was wanting to shut down the border, and the right was opposing it. I mean, literally, these people flip-flop back and forth, and it's just, it's mind-boggling to me. I actually want to ask you about in regards to not necessarily flip-flopping, but changing your position. We're going to an event this week. We're competing on a team together, and I really appreciate you accepting, especially as busy you are with the book tour. Plus,
I'm glad it's working out.
All the things with politics that you came and did this. But we're going to Bozeman to compete in the Sig Sauer event. Mm-hmm. It's a shooting competition, rifle, bow, archery, and pistol. But with that, your stance on guns and gun control and whatnot, you've changed your position a bit throughout your life with guns. And I actually listened to a podcast that you did with, I think it was Steve Scalise on your podcast.
Yes.
That you actually did on your podcast a few years ago. And you talked about how your view on guns has evolved and why. And it made so much sense to me because you talked about being a young girl growing up in Hawaii, surfing in a kind of a non-gun state, a family that didn't have guns. It was very easy to see why you would have grown up with a certain way of thinking towards guns and gun ownership, and how over the last 20 years you've evolved between military career and your experience in government. Talk about that a little bit about, and I will say, I actually really appreciate it when people change their position over time, but also are honest about it and just talk about the why, and it makes sense, not just because like it's a political move.
Yeah.
Talk about how, because that's one of the criticisms, like when we hear people say, you know, you're potentially maybe a potential pick for Trump with VP, and people are like, yeah, but her stance on gun control or on guns and whatnot. Talk about a little bit about how you evolved in that way of thinking.
Yeah, first of all, it kind of makes me smile a bit when people are like, oh, she's just, you know, this is just a political move, or she's just trying to get votes. And it's like, first of all, I'm not running for office, so I don't know whose votes I'm trying to get. Mm-hmm. But at different times when I've made decisions or made statements that are unexpected, or some people view as like, oh, this is just political expedience. You know, whether they're not choosing to see it or they just don't see it, like in almost every one of those positions, there have been just as many people saying, oh my gosh, she just committed political suicide. And so I don't make my decisions based on that calculus.
Yep.
And, you know, I mean, like you said, I grew up in Hawaii. One of the states has the most severe gun restriction laws in the country. My first pistol that I bought, it took me pretty much 2 years for me to go from buying it from the store called Young Guns in Hawaii to the day that I could actually take it home. Because I was in Congress at the time, and they have all of these timelines where, okay, well, you've got to take it from here, you've got to go and apply for the permit, then there's a 2-week waiting period, and if you miss that 2-week waiting period, then you got to start the process all over again. And I did that multiple times because I was like, well, I'm not here most of the time. Right. But you know, when I look at, there's just a difference in experience and a difference in culture. And this is where I encourage people, even people who are critical of me, like I totally understand it. And also, if you want to see change in our policies and you want to see more people understand maybe the view that you're bringing forward or the experience that you have or the position that you have, be open to having a conversation and recognizing, hey, not everybody has seen the world through the lens that you are seeing it through.
Right.
Really, I would say that the biggest eye-opening experience for me in really seeing our founders' intent for the application of our founders' intent for the Second Amendment was as a check on the power of a tyrannical government.
Right.
Yes, self-defense and, you know, hunting or recreational shooting, but really the most powerful reason and impactful reason why they passed the Second Amendment right after the first is exactly that. And to see how I never would have imagined that in our lifetimes we would see the rapid escalation and abuse of power that we've seen over these last several years, to where our freedom of speech is being taken away, our rule of law is being undermined. We literally had over half of the states in our country, over 32 states, trying to take the most prominent Republican presidential candidate off the ballot.
Right.
Unilaterally.
Right.
Oh, we think he's guilty of this crime, so we want to take him off the ballot. Over 32 states in our country trying to take away our right as Americans I don't care whose name it is, trying to take our right to vote for the candidate of our choosing away, preempt us from being able to make our own choice.
Or your right to even get information about potential things about the other candidate, whether it's the Hunter Biden laptop and suppressing, social media companies from reporting. And
and this is something I experienced even when I ran for president in 2020. I looking back, was kind of naive in setting out on this, thinking like, hey, I know I'm an underdog. I'm not gonna be able to raise as much money as everybody else. Most of the country has no idea who Tulsi Gabbard is, but the reasons why I was running was very clear. And I thought, at a minimum, I will have just as much of a fair chance as anyone else on that debate stage to make my case to the American people, and it's up to them to decide.
Right.
Silly me for thinking that would be the case, and really living through the reality of the fact that you have the party leadership who works very closely with big tech and Google specifically, and works very closely and collaborates with their friends in the big propaganda media, so that ultimately the result of this collusion, which is what it is they pre-select which candidates they want voters to know their name, to learn about their background and what they know about those specific candidates. So that at that time, I think there was like 22 or 23 presidential primary candidates. They culled that down to a handful, and those were the only ones that they wanted voters to choose from. And for the rest of us, it was either limiting airtime, it was smear attacks, it was
even to people with actual big names. I mean, Bernie Sanders. Yeah. I mean, Bernie was obviously pushed to the side in favor of Hillary, right? And and we even see right now with RFK how good luck. I mean, he clearly, resonates with some people, and is probably not. You're probably not going to see him on the debate stage with Trump and Biden this year. And I'm not necessarily somebody that wants to vote for RFK, but he has enough of a following, and he's got enough good points that he should be heard.
Right.
Like, it should be a free process. And if you're scared of somebody like that, then there's a reason. Yeah. And it's what I love about the fact that you talked in that podcast, I'd encourage people to go find it, because you guys talked about, there was the shooting that happened in Washington with, the senators out there playing their softball game.
Steve Scalise almost died.
Correct. Yeah. And it was a powerful podcast that you guys did, and you talked a lot about it. And I noticed you had put up a post, showed you finished, I think, second at the tactical games here recently. And somebody said, some degenerate got on and said something about, she doesn't support the Second Amendment, even though you're standing there in freaking, plate carrier, and you just taken second at the freaking tactical games. But one of the people that I know that works for Black Rifle Coffee said in response to him, well, yeah, we all used to shit our pants too, and now we don't. Like, we evolve, right? And it was a funny comment, but we do evolve over time. And even as a young person, maybe you didn't understand back then, like most of us don't when we're in our teens and 20s, what the founders of our Constitution were trying to lay out in that framework. Right. But as your experience through your military career and your time as a representative, I know you talked about on that podcast, you started seeing, you even played clips on there of, unlawful search and seizures that were happening through the FBI and, authorities, and the right to freedom of speech and the right to protect it.
That's right.
It's not all about crazy militias and people being crazy people, but you should have the right to, and you actually look what happened in Ukraine, and guess what Ukrainian government did right away? They started handing out guns to protect their own country.
Yeah, exactly.
And they do say the U.S., would be a tough place to invade and take over and whatnot, because we do have a well-armed citizenry. Yeah. So,
and I think in this context, it's important to recognize, for those who are rightly concerned about the continued assault on our Second Amendment rights, there are those who are in power and who are terrified of losing their power, which is why they are trying to disarm us as Americans. And then there are those who, are heartbroken, and rightly so, by mass shootings that occur and kids who are being shot at their schools, and in their lack of knowledge or experience or whatever you want to attribute it to, are driven by good intentions of wanting to stop people from being harmed, but don't understand that this erosion of our Second Amendment rights and trying to take away guns from law-abiding citizens will do absolutely nothing towards the thing that they actually do care about, and in fact will prevent us from being able to protect our kids and our families and our communities. And so I say all of that just to point out that it's important to show a little grace and recognize, okay, well, people may be coming from different positions, and to be able to discern between those in Washington who are literally trying to eliminate guns. They want to get rid of the Second Amendment altogether.
Right.
And then there are those where it's worth having that conversation and saying, well, I understand your care and concern for the safety of our communities. Let me share with you my experience, some data, some facts and knowledge that if you go down this path, this is where it'll lead.
Yeah. And I completely understand also. And I when I was out in New York, did a TV show out there, and I was there for a couple weeks. And so I just took time walking around like the Bronx from where the studio was at. And I walked around with a perspective of, I was surrounded by apartment building after apartment building. And I thought to myself, if I was born and raised here, and I didn't get a chance to go shoot guns and elk hunt and do the things I did in Montana, I can totally understand how somebody born in an apartment in Queens or the Bronx or whatever would not understand the quote unquote gun culture or gun ownership. I could also understand why you wouldn't want everyone around you walking around with guns if they hadn't been trained, and where do you go shoot, and where do you find a range? I can go shoot in my field right here safely.
Right.
That's a rarity.
Yeah.
So it's not that gun owners don't understand those people and their point of view. What I would encourage those people to do would be to go maybe try to find an event where guns are being shot, like a competition or something like that, and just educate yourselves a little bit on, even if you don't go shoot, if you go hang out around the tactical games, you're going to find the most unbelievably good people.
So true.
The event we're going to go to this weekend will be, those people would bend over backwards and do anything for you.
Yeah.
Go try to learn a little bit and understand, even if you don't want to necessarily shoot. I understand handing someone a pistol that's never held one in their life, it's a scary thing.
Yeah.
Because they don't have experience in training with it.
Yeah.
Me going out and catching a wave in Hawaii is a scary thing because I grew up in Montana, but you hiking with me through the mountains here where there's grizzly bears might be scary. It's all of our experiences.
Exactly.
So I encourage people that don't understand guns to try to put themselves in a position to just even be around those people.
Yeah.
And they'll quickly find out, like, oh, these are really good people.
Yeah.
And with these school shootings and a lot of things that are happening, it's more about our moral decay of our country.
Yeah.
And how do we solve that? And this kind of leads into my next kind of questions here. I see our candidates, and I'll even more specifically use our local candidates as an example, like a Tim Sheehy, a Tester, in any state, House of Representatives, the Senate. So much of what I hear them talk about is Ukraine, Russia, China, things, Libya, things happening all around the world, right? And what I don't hear them talking about are our local issues, our infrastructure, our men competing in women's sports, our schools, our lack of education going on in our schools, and the things that are happening there. So many of our local things that actually affect our lives, inflation. And part of me thinks the reason why is because those are all so hard to fix. Like the moral decay in our country and school shootings and whatnot, like let's take mental illness, for example. How do you solve that? What do you do with these people who are drugged out and homeless on streets? Where do you put them? These are hard problems to solve. And I feel like a lot of times it's almost easier to talk about things around the world, because even if we screw it up, it doesn't necessarily affect us.
You don't have to live with that
Look at Afghanistan.
In some cases, yeah.
Look at Afghanistan, how we withdrew there. We can just totally screw it up and walk away. Yeah. But here in our country, it's really hard to deal with our issues at home. What do you see how do we fix some of these actual local, like, how do we get people to come together on both sides? Is it even possible at all? You look at our candidates, I'm a Trump guy. I tend to support him, but also they're just at each other's throats. I don't even know how to ask it, but I don't know how we fix our domestic issues.
Overall, first and foremost, we have to hold these people accountable. Just because they're in elected office doesn't mean they're untouchable. The exact opposite is true. We have to remember that we have the power to remove these people from office. If they're not focusing on the issues that are most important to us in our communities, in our schools, in our streets, in our borders, in our place of business, what are they doing? Mm-hmm. They work for the people. And I agree with everything you just said. And I think that may be part of it, that it's easier to make these lofty talking points or talk about, spreading democracy around the world. And, oh, wait, what are you doing about our democracy? Oh, you're destroying our democracy here. Okay, got it.
Right.
You want to go in and this one hits home, where much of the funding that our politicians are sending to Ukraine is funding their government operations. Yes, a lot of it is going towards different weapon systems for certain, but we are funding their bureaucrats to run their government. Meanwhile,
we're funding Taliban right now, literally.
Yes, exactly. We're sending billions of dollars to Iran,
but we can't send money to Hawaii for a fire.
Exactly, and people who saw their homes burn down are still having to figure out. They still have a mortgage to pay. In many cases, they can't even begin to start to think about, well, when can I apply for a permit to start rebuilding the place that had been home for my family for generations?
Did you see FEMA just came out, I think it's today, and announced that I think they're running a $6 billion deficit right now. And they said, we're going into hurricane season right now. And they're in a $6 billion deficit, and they're not sure they have the funding if we have a bad hurricane season. If a hurricane hits, God forbid, Miami or New Orleans or something again, that they don't even have the funding to take care of what we're doing here, but we're sending all this money overseas.
Yeah. Also, I'd be curious about how FEMA is actually spending their money. How much is getting to the people who need help the most versus how much is being tied up in their bureaucracy. I didn't see the actual receipts, but the word on the street on Maui was that the FEMA officials were staying at the Four Seasons Hotel. And so, we have the right to ask for transparency and accountability. If you're saying you're running a deficit, and this is what we need, frankly, across the federal government, I agree with you that our government is beyond bloated, that we've got to take a whole relook at going back to the Constitution and recognizing our founders' intent for the federal government to be very, very, very limited, and look at what actually should be decentralized and that ownership and responsibility put at the state or at the local level. And part of that is looking at, not just a financial audit, but what's the objective and mission of these different federal agencies, and look at the data trends over, let's say, we'll just go for the last 10 years, for example. What are your metrics of effectiveness and your metrics of performance in being able to achieve that goal? For example, Department of Housing and Urban Development. What is your budget as it continues to go up? And how does that correlate with the, numbers of affordable housing units that are being built in our country that the federal government may be subsidizing in some fashion? You look at the rate of homelessness. You look at affordability of healthcare. Obamacare was touted as the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
Meanwhile, you look at how much it has made life very difficult for small business owners.
Yep.
And you look at how individuals, I had a friend who was brand new baby. She's a single mom in Iowa. And for her and she's self-employed, it was like $1,200, $1,300 a month that she was going to have to pay for health insurance for her and her baby.
Right.
Affordable? Who is this affordable for? And oh, by the way, it's a mandate. So if she or I or anyone else was like, yeah, you know what, I just can't afford insurance. Oh, okay, you're going to fine me now? The federal government's going to fine me? It's just when we look across the board, the answer too often is more money to these problems that no one has clearly defined. What is the cause?
Right.
And what is the actual practical solution to get after that problem?
And I've said it before, you, Donald Trump, none of these people are going to actually solve these problems for America. We have to do it locally.
Yes.
It has to be. The only thing that the federal government could actually do to help that would be to actually get out of the way and, let people get involved in their own local governments and make a difference. Frankly, even like the company that we're trying to build in our own little area, the revenue we bring into Montana, the people we hire, hopefully the better jobs we can pay. Like, if there could be 1,000 more little Montana knife companies around the country in whatever industry, that's the only way that it's going to actually improve. I mean,
and then you look at that accountability too. When you've got, whether it's a council member, board of education member, state house, state senate, you know where that guy lives.
Right.
And you can go and knock on the door and have a conversation.
But what's sad is I will bet you 99 out of 100 people that vote on our little ballot right here in Missoula County won't know. They're going to know Tulsi Gabbard, and they're going to know Joe Biden, and they're going to know a few big names on it, Tim Sheehy and Tester. They're not going to know House District 47. They're not going to know, they don't take the time. And this is what's sad, and Americans really need to reverse their way of thinking is, I still think it's important to vote for president, but that's not the vote that's really actually going to necessarily change their life locally. It's probably the House district guy and the judge and, the county commissioner, and the state auditor. And these people are the ones that actually affect your local business, local school board, fire board, all these things.
Yeah.
Well,
the only caveat to that I'd mention is what we've again just seen the president do by executive order through
for sure
through Title IX and how that impacts and that's again all of these paths lead to why is the federal government meddling in what's happening in your local elementary school here, and in that case the stick that they have chosen to use to force schools to comply with this insanity of if a boy comes to school one day and says, I'm not Johnny anymore, call me Jolene, and I want to go compete, on the girls wrestling team, they have to do it and comply or else face the federal government taking away the federal funding for the free and reduced lunch program, which feeds the kids who don't have the means. They come from families who are poor and they can't afford food on their own, which is just, to come from people who claim to be the compassionate ones and, the ones who are caring for the most vulnerable. It's quite sickening when you look at how they are trying to shove their agenda and force it on people and communities across state. So my point being, there are instances, given this current system of governance, where the executive orders and the stroke of a pen that comes from the president is having a very direct impact on families.
For sure. And frankly, the power to appoint federal judges. I mean, a lot of these dumb shit we do crank out of Congress, a lot of times eventually ends up maybe losing in, a Supreme Court case or a lawsuit that could change everything gets knocked down. So like having the Supreme Court leaning in the right direction is powerful, and just be rooted in the Constitution. Ultimately, and that's really they shouldn't be leaning any direction. It should just be, what does the Constitution say? Exactly. And we should not, and it's I always like it when I see people like, oh wow, I'm surprised Amy Coney Barrett, and Sonia Sotomayor are taking the same position on an issue, because they are trying to view this through a constitutional lens rather than, well, which party's president appointed you or nominated you. Sure. I do wonder, you're, obviously rumored to be kind of in the running of the final 3 or 4 people that might potentially get picked by Trump to be VP. I with the VP job aside, obviously, if whoever he was to select, I would think that would be quite an honor, and someone would be willing to take that role on, and it's a very, very important role, especially, frankly, on either side. I mean, we got 80-year-old presidents, so probably now more than any time in history, someone's a heartbeat away from being president. I even asked you one time what it's like knowing that you could get a phone call in the next couple of weeks, and it's like, well, you can either head home and go surfing, or you could be potentially vice president and one heartbeat away from president of the United States. Like it's, and I know you said, well, no matter what happens, you're going to stay involved all the way through the end of the election. But that is an amazing dichotomy of potentially what's happening right now in regards to just that. But what I wanted to ask you is, outside of the VP, where in government, let's say Trump got in, where in government do you think you could make the biggest difference if you were selected as a cabinet level position or whatever, aside from the VP pick? Do you have a particular job that you think, not that you want, but that you could actually be the most impactful and helpful on, or the most experience in?
Yeah. Secretary of State. I've served in the military for over 20 years, served in Congress on the Foreign Affairs and the Armed Services Committees for almost the entire time that I was there. And what we really need, we are closer to the brink of World War III and nuclear Armageddon now than certainly ever in my lifetime. And how did we get here? Why did we get here? We have too many politicians who are subservient to the military-industrial complex. We have leaders in the State Department who, rather than trying to exercise true diplomacy and exhaust all measures of diplomacy before considering war as a last resort, are doing the exact opposite, which is what has gotten us here. Increasing tensions with multiple countries, even nuclear-armed countries. Russia has more nuclear weapons than any other country in the world. And not making their policies and decisions within the most important context, which is what is in the best interest of the American people, our national security, our economic security, our ability to live in a peaceful and prosperous society. Instead, you have people making emotional decisions about, well, oh my God, there's a bad guy. We got to go topple that bad dictator and save those poor people. When in reality, we've seen time and time again how, this decision has often led to more suffering and death for those people you're supposedly trying to help.
Yeah.
You see decisions being made that are very clearly intended to serve the interests of the military-industrial complex, and then they go and sell it to the American people saying, hey, we're creating more jobs by sending billions of dollars to Ukraine because we're making the bombs here in America. And think that that's something we should supposedly celebrate. Why don't you just take some of that money and go and invest it in local economies, in small businesses, and people who are actually going out and creating good jobs for Americans, rather than creating this myth that if you give another $50 billion contract to a big defense contractor, like, you really think the guy working the line is taking home the big bucks?
You talk in your book about when you were deployed, how much Halliburton's name was stamped on everything.
Everywhere. I mean, that's, the old book, and if you haven't read it, I encourage people to read it, called War is a Racket. It's true. So ultimately what my point is, and I'm getting off on a tangent here, but I have the experience, the capability and the credibility, and most importantly, the courage to be able to lead in a position like that. And this is something I appreciate about President Trump, is like, time and time again, deep down, he has proven that he is not into going and starting more stupid, counterproductive wars in the world. And I complimented him on this when I was in Congress and he was in the White House, when he went and did what no other president had been willing to do, which was go and meet with Kim Jong-un.
And talk to North Korea. When he took office, we were on the brink of war with North Korea.
That's right. And
Obama was saying
I'm from Hawaii.
It was like inevitable.
We know that more than most. And yes, Obama was saying it was inevitable. Did President Obama ever go and try to meet with him?
Right.
No.
And he got a ton of flack.
When those of us who understood how important diplomacy is, urged him to do that, the response from the State Department and from Obama's White House was always, we don't want to reward Kim Jong-un's bad behavior by allowing him to meet with the President of the United States. I was like, this is your whole freaking problem right there.
Right.
You think that direct diplomacy is somehow like you are a gift to this person.
Right. No. And you're letting that guy be heard and meet with the president of the United States on camera, but I can guarantee you off camera, Trump's also like, okay, I came and met you. Now listen here, fucker.
Yeah.
Sit down and shut the hell up.
Yeah.
Like,
well, he often said that, I think, on camera.
But I mean, that,
the point is, he understands the power of sitting across the table from someone and having a tough conversation.
Right.
And that's the neocons and warmongers in Washington remain very powerful.
Right.
They have been for some time, and they remain very powerful. And there is that uniparty in Washington who are terrified of Trump becoming president again because he's going to get in the way of their war racket and their war profiteering. As Secretary of State, I bring my own personal experience and the courage and understanding that comes with knowing the true cost of war.
Sure.
And the record for people to know, like, I ain't bending my knee to any big defense contractor or special interest. My sole interest is our country, the American people, my brothers and sisters in uniform.
And restraint on your part also doesn't mean weakness either.
No, not at all. Yeah. It's being practical, pragmatic, and seeing the world through clear eyes.
Right.
Being a realist and not living in this fantasy world that so many of our politicians live in, saying, well, we want to go spread democracy around the world, or, we want to go and we're just going to fight this war to the end. It's like, what is it going to cost?
Right.
How much are you
what are we
putting
do
the American
in Ukraine?
people at risk?
Are we really going to help Ukraine rebuild? I mean, are we going to let them bomb the hell out of it, and then somehow we're going to sit there and pay to fix it? And my thing about Ukraine and a lot of these places, Israel, I'm all for helping our friends when they need help, like when they actually need help. When France, Germany, Poland, Great Britain, when they all call and go, guys, we can't handle it. Like, we've been trying. That's World War II, right? Like, when they get into a position where it's like, okay, they have clearly been trying to handle this problem, whatever it is, Russia marching across Europe, right? Like, obviously, we're not going to stand by and let that happen. But why are we always so fast to jump in and get ahead of everybody when there's neighbors around there? There's NATO for a reason. It's something that's bothered me, so much, because there's capable countries surrounding those countries like a Ukraine. Israel can handle a lot of their own stuff. And obviously they are a bit right now, and there's debates to be had on how they're doing that. But, I just look at the money that we're pouring out, and I see where the money we're not investing in our own country. And quite frankly, even not necessarily meaning we need to turn around and spend that money in our own country. Like, how about just not spending money at all? Like,
exactly.
And there's a program I talked to Trump Jr. about when he was here about like a trades program where if you want to give kids in the inner city a real chance, build a massive warehouse in the middle of the inner city and show them how to frame out walls inside that warehouse, make toilets flush, sinks run, electricity, lights turn on, teach them how to sheetrock, frame, paint, trim, and then tear it all out and do it again the next year. And you're going to show this kid that's 16 years old, like, framing's fun. I'm kind of good at it.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but this electricity thing, like, I get off on it. Like, I want to be an electrician. Yeah. Hey guys, did you know you can go make $25 an hour as a grunt for the electrician this summer and between now and when school starts in the fall? Like, not all these kids are going to go to college. Probably very few of them are going to go to college. They don't need to go to college. They can go make $100,000 a year being a roofing contractor.
Yeah.
Year one, you're a grunt. Year two, you're getting up there. Year three, you're running a crew. And 9 years into it, you've started your own roofing company.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I said we should be building these warehouses all over the country in the worst areas and teaching them a trade.
Yeah.
Like, hey, maybe you need to stay in math class and pay attention a little, because guess what you have to do when you're building something? You have to add and subtract fractions.
Yeah.
You have to be able to figure out some angles. Right.
You know what's so cool about that, beyond just like, yeah, that's a solid career and a very, very good paying job that's very practical, but just just that sense of pride and knowing, like, I've built that.
I can drive you
capability.
Yes, I can drive you all around this valley, all around western Montana, and I can show you power poles I climbed. I can show you cross arms I mounted, and hey, that tree right there. See those sleeves in the wire? Like a tree went right through there, and I fixed that.
Yeah.
To this day.
Yeah.
And a home builder driving down through a subdivision, like I built 6 of those homes. It is, you're building something that's real, that it makes you feel good that there's a family and they're having dinner right now in a house I built.
And just turning on its head this unfortunate and increasing feeling and culture of victimhood, that you are a victim of these horrible circumstances, which may be real in a lot of cases, and others it may not actually be very real. But regardless, that feeling of just like, oh my God, my life is horrible and it's not my fault and I don't know how to get out of this mess. That bringing back that feeling of empowerment and ingenuity and innovation that has been the heartbeat of our country for so long, from its inception, quite frankly.
Yeah, if you're a 14-year-old young black kid growing up and your older brothers are in gangs and your dad's in prison, and a lot of this story we've heard over and over, and it's real, and you're 14 years old and you actually are given like a spark of hope of like, oh, I didn't, like, around here where we grow up, like I told you on the way out here, my daughter's riding along with a local vet. Right. My son could go shadow a welder. There's places in this country, they call it white privilege, but there's places in this country where it is easier to go follow my dad around and learn how to run a backhoe if you wanted to. If some young kid came up and said, Mark, can I follow you around and watch you run backhoe or an excavator, my dad would help him, right? But there are areas in this country where there is less hope, but you can provide that hope and show that 14-year-old kid like, hey man, you do this, you can go get a real job and you don't have to get into that gang. And you can give those kids some actual hope and teach them even the skills of like, this is how you go knock on a door and ask that roofing contractor if you can work for him this summer. So we have to give kids hope, and it can't just be, hey, go to college and go into more debt.
Which that's a whole thing in and of itself. People don't it's become such a norm now, unfortunately, that in order to be quote unquote successful in life, you've got to have this piece of paper hanging on your wall, or maybe multiple pieces of paper. But when you go back to the origins of quote unquote higher education, it began as a finishing school for rich kids. And then, gradually people saw, well, hey, this is an industry that we can make a lot of money off of, and started trying to expand that customer base or that client base to the point where we now have so many people who are carrying this lifelong debt that can't be cleared by bankruptcy or anything else. And for many people, whereas it got them other than in debt.
Right.
And this is one where I'm encouraged to see, businesses and organizations at least starting to say, well, actually, I'm going to look at your capabilities and your experience and your work ethic and use that as the factors to consider whether or not you'd be a good fit for my organization, rather than some arbitrary piece of paper that you might, you spent a lot of money buying, essentially.
We looked at 40 applicants last week for a couple jobs, and we grazed real quick through. Take a quick look through their resume. College does show like, you can start and finish something and whatnot, and that's all fine, whatnot. And there's a few jobs that college is a little bit more important, engineering and some of those.
Sure. Those are real
and it
technical
skills. Does show like, they started and they went to college and they finished and they got a degree.
Yep.
But
like a doctor should go to medical school.
Yeah, you would hope so. However, we go right to their Instagram.
Yeah.
I go to their social media. What do they do on a Saturday morning? What kind of a person are they? Do they get up and go hike with their dogs?
Right.
Or do they go help their dad out on the ranch? Or do they go to the farmer's market? And do they do something with their girlfriend? Or what do they do?
Right.
Or are they showing themselves drunk off their ass every 3 days and, I slept in and I'm being lazy and what? I want doers. I can teach you what I need you to know.
There are a few things wrong with that. Number one, your decision that this is how you're living your life. But number two, that you thought it was a good idea to post it on Instagram.
The world. Yeah, no, there's
some multiple layers of judgment. Wrong
that
judgment
shows
calls.
Judgment.
Totally, absolutely.
And myself included, and a bunch of my employees have also done a bunch of stupid shit.
Yep.
But they were probably smart enough to not put it on their social media,
especially
and
now.
Show everyone.
I don't get it.
But it does show, like, are you family oriented?
Yeah.
Are you community oriented? Yeah. Do you work hard? Do you get up and do something when you don't have to?
That's right.
Like, that shows me the kind of employee, like culture fit.
Yeah.
like, that's a person I want in my company. We'll show them how to do what they need to do.
Right.
Are they go-getters?
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
But, well, we could go on for hours because we've had to kind of make this one a quick one. We have 3 more hours of driving to do, and we got some bows and guns to shoot. So.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting us out here. This is really special. It's special for me to be out here, but for Abraham and I to be able to come out here and experience all this together is a really special thing.
Well, it's very special for me. I really do love your book. I hope people go out and get it. I've found it very informative, and I love the way that you're going about things. I love the way that you're not. It doesn't feel like mudslinging and just more typical politics stuff. I'm frankly so over a lot of that stuff. I'm excited to spend a couple nights in a wall tent with you guys. Yeah. You're going to get the real Montana experience. You're like, what are we here to expect? And I have no idea.
Like, I might have said thank you, Josh, but no thanks if we were doing this in December. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah. No.
Doing it in the middle of June. Today was a beautiful day.
Here's what I'm expecting actually is in January, a phone call from you to come camp in Hawaii.
Fair point. Yeah. Fair point. We will get you when that happens. We will get you on a big old longboard, and we will get you on a wave. We will get you on a wave.
I'm going to need the water wings.
That's okay. And hey, no judgment. No judgment, because you will feel, and I'm sure you've got comparable experiences in your life, but you will feel the wave picking you up, and you will get that little kid happy in your heart, like giggly and everything. Right, I don't care how old you are. I don't care how tough you are. I don't care who you are. There is almost nothing that matches that feeling of just like visceral joy.
Trust me, I would love to actually surf for real. Like I see the excitement and the joy of it.
Yeah.
I'm not a super strong swimmer. That tends to be my problem.
That's what the floaties will be for. We got you.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you. Thanks for everything you're doing. Thanks for being so principled, and damn it, I hope you're involved in a high place in government soon.
I want to be in a place where I can take the things that we were talking about and be in a position of actionable impact to start to fix them. Last thought for people who are listening or who are watching: if you feel hopeless or in despair about, the powers that be that we are up against, who are doing all that they can to take away what we hold most dear, know that they are doing this because they are terrified that we, the people, will recognize we're actually the ones who hold the power.
Yep.
And that a free people in a free society are the greatest threat to their ability to remain in power. And this is where I am hopeful about the opportunity that we have in this election. The conclusion is not foregone. We have to remain vigilant and very clear-eyed, because clearly those in power are willing to do whatever it takes in order to stay in power. But the wisdom of our founding fathers is quite incredible, where they set this system of governance up where ultimately we are the ones who get to decide who is in our government. And that is a message to every American, that we have to take that responsibility seriously. And if on any of the issues we're talking about, you are angered by the direction our country is going, we got to look in the mirror and recognize we're the only ones who can fix this.
Yep.
And now is the time. We may disagree on this issue or that issue, or how we, what immigration reform really actually looks like, or how we deal with, the fact that so many of our kids are graduating from school functionally illiterate. We can and should have a diverse discussion about how we solve these problems. Now is a moment where we have to come together as Americans who cherish peace and freedom, and stand together to protect that freedom, our democracy, and our Constitution. Otherwise, we will wake up before long on the other side of this if we do nothing and see ourselves living in a country where we are no longer free, and this country that we love has become unrecognizable. So it's up to us to take action.
Amen to that.
Thank you, brother. Great to see you.
Appreciate you.